All right, I want to thank everybody for coming out this evening to our, what is this, Phil, our seventh? Our seventh Assembly Minority Task Force on Critical Infrastructure and Transportation. My colleague Phil Palmisano and I have been traveling the state of New York this last month and a half, visiting with municipal leaders and first responders and all these different types of organizations in the transportation industry to figure out how we can do a better job to streamline the process and better invest in our infrastructure and transportation system in the state of New York. There's a lot of unmet needs, and there's definitely a financial element to this. Out of our $168 billion budget, I believe just about $4 billion of it goes to the highway, the dedicated bridge and trust fund. A portion of that, only a portion of that goes to capital spending. And there's a lot of different rules and regulations and red tape that can delay some of these projects. So by speaking with all the stakeholders and listening and learning from one another, we can come together and compile a report with recommendations to improve this process. And I do want to thank my colleagues for being here today. Obviously, Phil, the co-chairman of this task force, and my co-host of this task force meeting here today for the Hudson Valley region, all the way from across the Hudson River, Carl Brabnick from Orange County. And Carl is a dear friend. I've known each other for a long time. So I want to thank them for coming, and I'll introduce them to say a few words, and we'll start with my colleague, Mr. Chips, Phil Palmisano.
Thank you, Kevin. I want to thank all of you for coming tonight. I want to thank you, Kevin, and Carl for hosting this event. I just wanted you all to know that Kevin and Carl are staunch advocates on your behalf, particularly when it comes to the local infrastructure funding each year. They're right there helping lead the fight. We understand how important this is. The local infrastructure has kind of been a common theme of our this is our seventh forum, as Kevin said. It's been a common theme that we've heard. It's been a priority of ours for a long time, our conference. We have seen some success in that area over the past 6 years, but not nearly enough where we need to do. When you think of 87% of the roads in this state are owned and maintained by our local municipalities, 52% of the 18,000 bridges are owned and maintained by our local municipalities, 48% of the miles driven are driven on local roads. This issue is a public safety issue. It's a public safety issue. It's an economic development issue. It's a property tax issue for our taxpayers. This should not be a political issue or a partisan issue. This is a common sense issue. When you hear the reports, the Comptroller's report came out saying that the bridge deficiencies, if they were quantified in dollar amounts, is about $75 billion worth of bridge deficiencies work that needs to be done. Out of that $75 billion, $27 billion is on the local bridge infrastructure. When there's a report out by CNBC when they talk about the best states to do business in, our infrastructure is rated the 7th worst in the nation. I mean, that's a challenge, and that's why we're trying to, with this task force, the purpose of it is to hear input from you, what your challenges are, what your ideas, suggestions, best practices, where we can be helpful. If there's regulations that are troublesome or burdensome. We heard a lot on the Bridge New York program that sometimes the application, it started out being a one-page application, that has become a little bit more burdensome and challenging for some municipalities because of the time it takes to do the paperwork. But the whole point of this is to be proactive. We want to be proactive with ideas and suggestions, not reacting to a tragedy. We don't need a bridge collapse and then making decisions. We shouldn't be doing that. We need to be proactive. I think public safety and transportation and infrastructure is something our taxpayers understand. They want those investments in those resources. They want to see their state tax dollars come back to their communities to fix their local infrastructure. So the whole purpose of this is to listen to you, and we appreciate you guys coming out. We look forward to having your input, and that's going to help us in putting together a final report that we will be presenting at the beginning of January probably to the governor and our legislative colleagues to kind of hopefully lay out a blueprint on some suggestions on things we can do, tangible steps we can take working together to improve our infrastructure at the state and local levels. So thank you again for coming out, and again thank you to Kevin and Carl for hosting this.
We'll introduce Carl Brabnick.
Yes, hello everybody. Carl Brabnick. I'm the State Assemblyman for the 98th District, which is Western Orange County, Southern Orange County, and a small portion of Rockland County. Glad to be here, and thank you to Kevin and Phil for bringing this forward. They pretty much said it all, but I can tell you, I'm a former town supervisor in the town of Deer Park in Orange County. I know I'm very familiar with a lot of the challenges on the local level. We've been for years pushing for more CHIPS funding because we relied on that. We heavily relied on that in the town of Deer Park, and I know when I took over in the town, we had a budget. We had 88 miles of road that we were responsible for in the town, and we budgeted like $125,000 a year for repairs, which is about enough to, pave a mile of road. So we were pretty much on an 88-year schedule, which is totally unacceptable. So again, we relied a lot on FEMA money, on CHIPS money, on different grant programs throughout the state. So when I went to the state legislature, that also infrastructure became an important priority to me, because we look around even in Orange County, a lot of municipalities around the Hudson Valley and around the state of New York. I mean, there are bridges that are 75, 100 years old. They're past their useful life. They need to be replaced, and it is a public safety hazard. So, and I know in Orange County, they've been making steps to replace about 5 bridges a year over there, so which is good. It's proactive, but we definitely need to do more. And I'm here to listen to your thoughts, opinions on what we can do. We all drive the local roads and the state roads especially, and a lot of them are in disrepair. I get a complaint probably every day in my office about a certain section of state road that needs to be maintained or repaired. So, sometimes it's a struggle with DOT, sometimes they get out there right away. But, we definitely try our hardest all the time to, help out as much as we can. So again, we're here for you today. We're here to listen. And thank you for all taking the time to come out and, help us out with this.
Thanks, Carl. Before we get started, I am just want to make sure I also thank the town board and supervisor and the people of the town of Patterson for allowing us to have this meeting here. Should have started with that. Before we close this meeting, if anybody else would like to speak or ask questions, we'll open it up in case I forget. But for now, I think it's probably appropriate to start with some of our friends from the town of Patterson. And if you'd like to say some remarks, I think it's best just because we've got a good number of people to move it along. Maybe our supervisor, Rich Williams, Pete DeAndrio, and who else we got from Councilwoman Mary Smith, and our highway superintendent, Russ Goff. Would you like to come up here and just say a few words about some of the needs in the town of Patterson and some ways we can improve it? It can just be one, and quite frankly, if you want to talk from there, we can do that too. All right.
Russ, they're your roads. Well, first I'd like to thank the members of the Assembly for coming down here and hearing from us. We don't see this very often, and frankly, I've been here in the town of Patterson for 20 years. This is the first opportunity that I've actually had to speak to a group of the Assembly. I'm always talking with Kevin on various issues. He's great to reach out to. Second, I'd like everybody to understand that local government is not the issue. Local governments are the closest to the taxpayers who we are asking to pay for the infrastructure and the improvements. We have been lean for many years, even before the 2% tax cap was around. We are not the problem as others at the state would like to make us out to be. Property taxes are a necessary evil, and much of the property taxes we ask our residents for are because of programs and requirements that the state has handed to us. One such example, which I supported, was the cancer bill. But unfortunately, there's a cost that goes along with that, and I was hit with a $15,000 increase in our taxes this year just to pay for the additional insurance for the firefighters. It's a good bill. I support it. I think the firefighters deserve it. But there is a cost to go with that, and that cost ultimately gets passed on to our taxpayers. So towns are struggling. Towns and villages are struggling, trying to stay lean because they are our residents. We do hear from them directly. And then we have the additional cost of trying to maintain our roads, our infrastructures, our water treatment plants, our wastewater treatment plants. One of the primary sources of funding that we have to assist us with meeting our needs and upgrading these facilities or extending or expanding our facilities is the Consolidated Funding Application Program. It is not a bad program, but the rules and requirements that they place on us, prior to the CFA being implemented, I will say the town of Patterson was very successful in securing grants. We could write grants, we could demonstrate the need, and we could meet the requirements. Since the CFA, almost every grant application that the town of Patterson puts in is knocked out because we are too affluent a community. I could tell you Patterson, while we have some good residents within our town, is not an overly affluent community. That metric with the median income needs to be looked at, and I think it should be taken out. You know, for what I see, the CFA is directing most of the grant money to lower income areas, and that penalizes people like the town of Patterson. I have a real problem with my one of my commercial areas, Front Street. We've been trying to redevelop that for many, many years. We have added anchors on either end of the street. We put sidewalks in, we put sewers in, we've done everything that the Regional Plan Association told us we had to do to make that a viable corridor. We've got 3 remaining lots which are key to making this a viable Main Street area. Recently, because of changes within the health department regulations, we were told we're no longer going to be able to develop those lots because we need to provide a public water system. I've been chasing money now for a long time trying to find a pot of money to pay for the public water supply system, and I've been unsuccessful in doing it because we don't meet the criteria, mostly the median income criteria. But that's key to redeveloping our Main Street area, and unless I find some way to do that, we're going to have this blighted area with the town of Patterson for many years to come. I want to bring up Route 22. You know, I know Kevin Burns was very instrumental in helping Route 6 get paved. I can tell you Route 6 is was nowhere near as bad as Route 22 is. And we're coming into the winter months, and I can anticipate that it's going to get even worse. So we definitely need to start focusing on Route 22 and get that paved from the Patterson, you know, from the middle of Patterson all the way down. I think that will conclude my remarks, unless Peter or Mary, you have anything you'd like to add? Russ?
No.
Did I miss anything? Other than Russ needs more money for paving?
More chips, right?
More chips. So.
Great. Well, thank you, Rich. And I want to just, I know your comment about the members coming here. I think that means a lot, because when we're up in Albany during session, there is a sea of orange from highway superintendents across the state that come up to Albany, and because of the crazy nor'easters that we had this past year and those storms, and the people of Patterson got especially hit during that storm, as well as the microburst, tornadoes, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
And you have an amazing workforce here that went through that. But since they weren't given that opportunity to come up to Albany, it's nice that we're here now to listen. And I want to thank you for obviously your remarks.
If I can just touch on that briefly so everybody here knows, Patterson was one of 2 towns in the area that got hit by I say it's a microburst. Everybody wants to call it a tornado. I disagree, but a microburst that took out 213 poles, telephone poles, snapped them off, closed down every road in the town. We have a great team here in Patterson headed by Russ Koff. We got all the roads open and all the poles back up in 6 days.
Wow.
So, great team here in Patterson.
Absolutely.
So, I thank you for coming down, and I'm very happy to continue to work with you any way I can. So, thank you.
Thank
You got it, Rich. Rich, sit tight just in case we have any questions to clarify
Okay.
stuff.
Sure.
Just so we can get some ideas and drill down. I know you mentioned about as far as property taxes and through the state government, and one of the things that the governor's office talks about is shared services, right? And we've asked this question in almost every single task force meeting, and we get almost the same exact answer. Are there any success stories in shared services, and new, right, where the state has rewarded any sort of funding for with transportation? What we typically heard is highway departments have invented shared services and have been doing it for years, and local municipalities have been doing it for years. So we haven't really seen a whole lot of success from that governor's proposal. But I just want to ask it just so I can make sure we Let me clarify that too.
So, you know, again, to follow with that, Patterson has been sharing services with Putnam County Highway Department, the town of Southeast, the town of Kent. You know, the highway superintendents are constantly talking amongst themselves about their needs, and if somebody has a need, we find a way to fill it. We do the same thing with sanitation services. I've got some residents that it's easier to access garbage collection from the town of Southeast, so I have an agreement with the town of Southeast. They will pick them up. It's a cost savings to everybody. We're always looking for ways to cut costs and share services, and have been doing that well before there was any mandate to do it. I think the mandate has made it more difficult, if anything. But we are working on it, and you know, we did adopt a shared services plan this year in Putnam County. All the supervisors agreed to it with the county, and we all participated. And I look forward to working on some of the details with that. I know we've got a meeting coming up.
That's great. Thank you. I think my colleague Phil has a question too.
Yeah, I have a couple questions, if that's all right, for you or Russ, and it's kind of some of these questions I'm going to ask is really all of you can address it too when you come up, or if you want to chime in, because it's kind of along the same category. But relative to the CHIPS program, I mean, we know how vital that is for our local communities. What percentage of your budget, highway budget, would you say comes from the CHIPS program? As far as like some areas, if we go to some of my areas where I'm rural upstate New York, we have some towns that are so small that sometimes the CHIPS money is the only money they have for their local infrastructure. Some where it might be 30 or 50%. I just wondered, as a town, like, you know, what percentage of your
Overall budget or road paving budget?
Just your road budget.
About 30%.
30%.
I thought it'd be higher than that. You sure it's not higher than that?
Yeah.
Okay, well, he's my boss.
With regard to that, is there, one of the things too, we've heard a couple times that, and at least especially it was brought up more in rural areas, what relative to the CHIPS reimbursement, there's certain criteria you have to meet for it to be qualified for reimbursement. Is there changes or that you could recommend or see relative to the CHIPS program that you might recommend that, sometimes you hear about 10-year useful life, certain types of applications that aren't eligible for CHIPS reimbursement? Are there certain changes that would give you a little bit more flexibility and help some of your towns, whether it's Patterson or any other towns in the area, that you would recommend?
I know in Patterson, we use all our chips for blacktop. I don't buy any equipment, I know I can, but it all goes to blacktop. I never have enough blacktop.
So right now, I know under the current law, with CHIPS, for CHIPS projects, the cap is $250,000. Anything above $250,000, you have to bid out competitive bidding. There's legislation that we have in that would raise that threshold to $500,000 because it would basically allow you more flexibility to do the work in-house and bid it out for competitive bidding, which could add cost to your project. Is that something that you and the other towns would be supportive of, that would be helpful to towns like you to have raise that threshold of the competitive bidding from $250,000 to $500,000 or higher?
Yeah, well, we bid that out. We don't do that blacktop ourselves here.
Okay. I know some towns that they've said that they try to do certain things as far as certain work that requires that raising that threshold would be helpful. So that's what I was asking.
It definitely would be helpful.
Yeah. Okay. Is 500 with going from 250 to 500? Would that be a big help, or do you think we should try? I don't know how high we could try to push it, but is 500 a good?
No, 500 is a huge. It's a big jump.
Yeah.
Big jump. It's
Okay.
a huge jump.
All right, that would be helpful. Relative to another area I want to talk about is relative to the Bridge New York. We've heard that as we travel around the state to some municipalities, particularly if they don't have engineers or consultants in-house, the Bridge New York application has turned out to be a little bit more burdensome because initially it started out with a one-page application. Now it's multiple pages, and some have had expressed frustration in putting in those applications. Is that something you or other towns are experiencing and seeing as you work through this process?
Yes, definitely. It's definitely gotten a lot more burdensome.
The issue of culverts has come up a lot at our meetings. Do you guys have a lot of culverts that you have to deal with as well?
Oh, a lot of culverts, yes.
Because one of the ideas that has come out of these meetings is because you have the CHIPS allocation and you have Bridge New York. Now, the Bridge New York allows for culverts if you meet certain criteria. One of the ideas we've talked about and bounced around, and it has seemed to get a positive response. I want to get your take on it. Would you guys think it would be helpful if they created another line within the CHIPS, like a CHIPS-like formula for culvert reimbursement? Because of just, on an annual basis. Is that something you think would be a positive thing and be well received?
That would be a good idea, because in my instance, I'm down in Thompson, Sullivan County. We have a small culvert project. It's $120,000 to do the engineering and everything on it, would add a tremendous cost to the 120, when I just could get, the contractor that's doing it could give me the specs, and if I could just get reimbursed by CHIPS for that, on that formula, would be much simpler, and it would be cost effective. Because
So-
it didn't pay me to hire an engineer to engineer a $120,000 culvert project.
So when we are talking about adding another line, we're talking about increasing the funding as well.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay.
That's because the thing is, as Kevin mentioned, there's dollars out there. It's just they're not being put to where they need to be. If you look at the dedicated bridge and trust fund, I think right now, just in the state, we collect about $4.7 billion a year in driver-related fees. The sales tax on gasoline. About $520 million is the state share. The other share goes to the locals. That $520 million, you think it would go? Most people think that the sales tax they're paying on gasoline was go for infrastructure. It's not. It goes into the general fund. Half it goes into the general fund. The other half goes to pay for bonds. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, even some of the dollars that are dedicated to the bridge and trust fund, it's not every dollar amount does. It's just a percentage that goes into this. So that's why it's just small. And when you look at the breakdown of the dedicated trust fund, only about 22% of that is actually going to capital infrastructure. I think 39% of it's going for debt payments, and right now currently around 38% is going to DOT and DMV operations. So that should be done on general fund spending. It shouldn't be done on dedicated bridge trust. So there's dollars out there, we believe. It's just a matter of showing those priorities. So yes, we'd be looking at trying to push to create a line for that. And the question I have is because it's come up because this issue has come up also with the issue of water and sewer, a line item for water and sewer to give a little bit to municipalities on that. And the question, there's legislation on that as well. There's no legislation or no proposal on the culvert side of it. There is on the water and sewer side of it, because municipalities with water and sewer infrastructure, if you don't have, if you're paving your roads and your water mains break or your sewer lines break, then you're digging up your roads to fix that. So there has to be a maintenance from that, to try to look at that. Now, how to quantify that seems to be the problem with that legislation, as we've seen. It's still something we want to push, and even if it's giving us some money. But I think with culverts, if I'm not mistaken, there would be it'd be an easier way to quantify that, because you probably have an inventory of how many culverts you have. Sizes, are they 10 feet, 20 feet, 19 feet, 15 feet, and how many of them, from that perspective, they should be able to quantify a formula, just like you do with CHIPS. You're based on the number of road miles and your vehicle registrations and things like that. It seems like that'd be a little bit easier to quantify. It might take some time to do it. But yes, we'd be looking at trying to create more funding for that. It would just be you get your CHIPS allocation and another allocation, we'd hope, that we go to the municipalities for culvert work. That would be something that you'd probably look at, would be a positive.
Well, just for the record, it shouldn't be that hard to quantify, because we are in the east of Hudson watershed, so we've literally had to map out our entire drainage system from the beginning to the end.
Good.
All right.
Any
thanks.
other questions? All right.
Thank you, Rich.
Appreciate it. Thank you. I'm going to go do my other job now.
Thanks. Well, next, number 2. I know we got some of our some representatives from Somers. We got, I think I saw Councilman Faulkner come in, and we got our highway super too. Is he?
No,
he's not. Okay, Bill. I mean, so yeah, you can come up. Yeah, just come up. It's just if there's any specific. I mean, you heard some of the things we talked about here,
Yeah.
but as it pertains to Somers and what you know from working with the
Sure.
town.
I mean, what we have, first of all, thanks for pulling this together, because it is important, okay? And when we go out on the campaign trail and we talk to people, one of the top 3 things they talk about is infrastructure, particularly the roads. So what we would like is to know, if you know, what is the game plan for repaving the roads, the state roads within our town, and I'm sure Ed from your town wants to know. You may not be able to hold to those timetables, but if you could let us know what the game plan is, we could share that with our constituents. The other part is there has been some progress, so we want to thank you for that. There are parts of Route 100, 202, and 35 that have begun some reconstruction, so we greatly appreciate that. In terms of, other than letting us know what the game plan is, if there's a way, and this is just a brainstorm of an idea, and it may not work, it may work, when we in Somers plow the roads in the wintertime, we plow the state roads as well. So our highway department gets some sort of reimbursement from the state for plowing the state roads. So if we were to expand on that idea, and we were to, say, repave our own roads, or at least the state roads within Somers, we'll do it. We've got the equipment, or we have access to the equipment. Can we get some sort of reasonable reimbursement for doing so we don't have to wait online? Just a thought.
Thanks, Bill. I know, I'm glad you pointed out Route 100, because I was driving down.
It's
through
an
Somers the
asphalt
other day.
slalom.
Yeah, it's rough, and like Route 6 last year for the folks in the Hamlet of Carmel.
Yeah.
I know 202 was done earlier to that section, and it's something that we've been trying to highlight. And it's one of the reasons that honestly prompted me to pitch this to our leader, Brian Kolb, of our conference. And obviously they said, hey, let's bring in Phil Palmisano, because he's really like one of the most well-known assembly members on this issue, is because we've had projects that get announced and then there's delays. So, and people think that there's all this money for transportation because, as Phil said, we give as taxpayers a tremendous amount, whether it's in income taxes or directly through fees and taxes on gasoline. The expectation is you're going to take care of the basics and the fundamentals, and roads and transportation, I mean, that's as basic as it gets. It's not exactly the most sexiest issue, but everybody uses them. Every school district uses them. Everyone that goes to the library uses them. It doesn't pick winners and losers. Everybody uses the transportation system. So I think streamlining information through the DOT, that's something that we've been working on. I know there's a lot of concerns about some things going on right now with the 84, and we've written, partnering with our state senators, I've written letters, and local officials, I should say, from Putnam County to try to get more information. I can tell you, from my experience being in my first term here, within about 8 months, we got a new DOT commissioner. I got put on the transportation committee, and then during the first transportation committee meeting, I highlighted a lot of our local needs. And since then, the communication has gotten better because we got a new regional director for Region 8. I think it's gotten better, but there's still a lot of work we need to do. A lot of work we need to do, and to build that communication and make sure that we identify where these project delays are, because obviously you as town representatives want to know. I'm sure the fire departments want to know, and the commuters and the residents want to know. So that's something. That's one of the big reasons why we're here, is to help identify those types of things. So I'll thank you for being up here, Bill.
Sure.
Anybody else?
One question in regard to that. I know the one issue about partnering with the state, and if you do the work, I would think, I know on some of that stuff, if I'm not mistaken, there's like an agreement between a municipal agreement with the state. I think it's certainly whether Kevin and Carl facilitate that discussion with DOT yet. I don't know about, if you're doing the paving, if that would fall within that or not, but it certainly doesn't hurt to ask the question. And certainly if you're doing work for the state, there should be hopefully some type of reimbursement that's coming along for some of that work, or some type of an agreement that you can work out. I know you mentioned about...
Because we do have a 10-year plan in our own town to redo all of the town roads. Right. So we've got the talent, we've got the equipment, we've got the expertise. Just let us do the state roads, and you pay us accordingly.
I think it
takes it off your plate.
It certainly doesn't hurt to have the discussion, and I think that's something...
Shared services,
right? Because one of the things we referred about, there's a study I think is called the Road to Ruin report, and it said that on the state roads there's a backlog from it went from just 2 years ago $4.3 billion worth of back road work needed on state roads up to $5.5 billion just in that period of time. And is that something you're also seeing because of resources that you're a backlog on local roads as well as the state roads? Obviously, you're probably experiencing here because you get some need on the state side of it, but you have a 10-year plan, so you're on...
Yeah. I've got 20. This gentleman has a boss in the room. I've got 20,434 bosses in my hometown, and we're going to stay on track for that 10-year repaving.
Good.
Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next we'll go to, I saw some friends from Yorktown take the trip to get up here. I saw Ed, and did Tom Diana come up too?
No,
Okay. All right, well, Ed, if you want to make any remarks from town councilman from the town of Yorktown, thanks for being here, Ed.
Thank you for, gentlemen, for putting us on, listening to listening to our needs and trying to get them solved. You know, we already, I'm sure, I missed the first 20 minutes, but I'm sure that a lot of it has been talking about the paving and the roads and the infrastructure, so I'm hoping I'm not repeating, but, you know, in particular in Yorktown, there's a huge concern at the 202-35 corner. And we actually have 4 major projects coming in line that want to give up some roadway to make all the projects happen. So we did a mini master plan of that area to say, okay, if these 4 projects come online, what would need to happen with the road? We had a traffic consultant in, Dr. Phil Greeley, and he looked at it, and there's the big thing was every property is willing to give up some of their land to widen that intersection, close off entrances in and out. I know, Kevin, you're probably familiar with the Roma building, where I think there were 6 or 7 in a small little strip, 6 or 7 egresses to 202 and 35 out of there. And we're trying to clean that all up, and the big thing is putting in turning lanes. So it's going to come down to DOT taking the land. But the big concern is, everyone is saying, will DOT ever be able to do the project? Will they have the money to do it? Which is sort of sad, where we're at a major safety concern at a major intersection when you want to have walkability in your towns. And that's going to be a problem coming up, that we're going to be looking for some solutions. And I know we're already trying to contact DOT. So I thought this was pretty fortuitous that we could come and maybe get a hand on that, get some people talking to transportation and saying, hey, this Yorktown project is a pretty important project, from not only from a traffic point of view, because that whole intersection backs up all the way down 35, all the way up and down 202, but it's going to be essential for safety for people crossing. And a case in point, I guess it was last summer, I was driving with the supervisor at the time, Michael Grace, and we got a call in the evening of an employee from one of the restaurants who was crossing the street to go to the mini mart, and actually got hit by a police car going out on a call. So the safety there is a huge issue. Let me just open my notes back up. Sorry, phone closed on me. Another problem that we've had, and I know Yorktown is not unique in this either, the blackouts. So we've gone to DOT to try to have a plan put into place, which probably should be a safety plan anyway on the state roads, of at least having the pigtails there to be able to hook up a generator to these traffic lights, because some of the major traffic lights are causing such a huge problem. So along the Route 6 corridor, the 202 corridor, we've been trying to get them to pigtail through and just have hookup so we could get a generator. If they had generation that could work through some of those ones, all the better. But you know what? In the worst case scenario, I'll pull one out of my garage and hook it up if it means that much to public safety. And then I did have here with the paving, you know, the shared services and maybe consolidation, and even to outsource for some. The town of Yorktown outsources a lot of their paving, and we're getting it laid in place at a price that we can't do ourselves. Imagine if you were able to take 2-3 municipalities, put them together, and say, look, you know, the state roads in these areas, we need to get them done. What can we get for laid in place? I don't know, you know, from the resource point of view, if we have enough resources to get to these roads quick enough. Yorktown, before we really started pushing it over the last administration, was on something like a 45-year plan. We cut it in half, and probably more than half, because we did about 1.4 million in paving, and that's the goal, to keep pushing that down. and get within a 18-year plan. But, you know, having those state roads taken care of is a huge, huge part of that. That's pretty much where we're at.
Thanks, Ed. I know in Yorktown, it's, like most of the towns I represent, there's a state road that goes through. And it's definitely essential for the commuters and the economy in Yorktown, the business community going down to Yorktown Heights through Shabok. I mean, you got a bunch of different little communities within the town of Yorktown. And of course, we have that very well-known parkway that goes right through my district, right through
Yes.
Yorktown as well. And I think that might come up with perhaps with some other speakers, because there's always some pending projects on that, I think, further up north of Yorktown and Putnam Valley. But
They have done a lot of work on the Taconic at that point, and you know, it's needed. But you know, Yorktown is that major. There's no easy way to get from like Peekskill to Somers or 684, but it does go through Yorktown. You know, it's a major route. Matter of fact, one of our traffic problems on some local streets, we had our safety officer tracking cars, and he said, well, our problem isn't the Yorktown traffic, it's the Connecticut traffic, because they're all coming out of 35 on their way through to 202 in the Taconic, and they're cutting through the neighborhoods. So, you know, opening the roads, like I'm talking about at that major intersection, getting that taken care of. And, you know, our kids dodge cars getting to their buses, and it's not a pretty sight.
yeah, that's a real public safety issue. And as far as at a minimum with the communication to the DOT, and you know, I'll certainly continue to be an advocate directly with you, Ed. But when we share this final report, not only will we be sharing it with, you know, the governor's office and our colleagues, but certainly it'll be publicly available, and we can share it even with, you know, the DOT too, so they can see our recommendations.
I got a question for you, and probably for Bill as well, and anyone else relative to this, because I know like the one question we were talking to Rich and Russ about the percentage of chips being as a percentage of your highway budget. How does that work out for your guys approximately? Any idea?
It's roundabout.
30%, kind of around regular thing.
28 to 32%, I think we've run, but depending on how much we've been pushing town money in
Sure.
too. So
one of the other things that's come up a lot, came up a lot in the southern tier, you know, some of the regulations that you have to face, whether it's a bridge project or things of that nature. Are there particular regulations that you're running into that's making it more difficult to do certain projects, whether it's a bridge project or anything along that line?
we have a couple of bridges and culverts that are going. It's just, you know, it's a time-consuming project. I don't particularly remember anything coming across saying, hey, we're having a huge issue with this. But our town engineer is a former county guy who knows some of those systems and has it in place. And Dave Paganelli at Highway has been working with him very well. So they haven't come across to me, but that doesn't mean they're not trying to solve. So I can look into that a little bit and get back to Kevin.
I'll give you an example. What came up to us was from like county highway superintendent said, because of the bridge requirements, so like if it's a federal bridge reimbursement, you know, where it's, I think it's 85 and 80%, and then it's 15% state, 5% local. But there's so many regulations that get put in place on those types of projects to get the reimbursement. You know, the number of inspectors that need to be out there, and that's part of the state handbook, this guidelines as well, where they gave an example of like if with their own people, if they went out and did like you were talking about, let's go out and do the roads. If we did the bridge on our own, you know, we have our own inspectors, our expertise, we could do the bridge for, you know, save 20 to 30% of the cost of the total bridge. You still have a safe, effective bridge. It just wouldn't be a federal bridge, you know, but things like that. And then another area that's came up particularly up in upstate. I don't know if it's prevalent here, maybe it is. I don't know, because you're closer to New York City. But the MWBE program, which is really challenging to a lot of municipalities, especially when you talk or organizations, especially when you talk about whether it's professional services or for the contracting outside of it, you having to meet that 30% threshold. Where in upstate, you know, we just don't have that criteria. I mean, where they have to go, basically a lot of those people upstate would have this contract out to companies in New York City or even go out of state to try to meet it because it's like a pass-through. And, you know, we're looking at legislation that would basically make it mirror your region, you know, whether it's your DOT region or the region you're in. If, you know, instead of being 30%, if you're 8% or 10%, then that's where the threshold you have to meet, rather than just having an arbitrary 30% number. Are you facing any challenges along that line, whether it comes to the MWE program relative to professional services or contract?
The best thing I can tell you about that is most of our bridges, if not all of them, are county-owned, not necessarily state-owned. And the one that is, you know, most important is the Plum Brook Bridge, and that's been shut down, disabled, closed off for many, many years. And that's one thing to sort of get that up and running, and wouldn't that be nice to have? However, our emergency services, fire department, police department, reached out to us and said, we need this access because it's going to save minutes and minutes off of our response time, which could save lives. And that's something that's been stuck. So the regulation is the state regulation that's held it up. I'm sure, I think it's really just county priorities that's hasn't given us the funds for it yet.
I know the bridge, not a specific bridge, because I remember speaking with the supervisor at one point. It's an expensive project. It's like upwards of $1 million, I think, for that specific project. So I know there's definitely the financial need for that. But to Phil's point, I know the MWBE requirements have really delayed projects and made it difficult to get local work. And I think we've heard stories, I think in the southern tier, where someone said that they had to, you know, get someone from Pennsylvania. So, I mean, I don't think that's the intent of any of this, right? We want to make sure that we have local people working on these projects, and we want to make sure that they get done timely and cost effectively, and that gets done. I think it's just a basic expectation. All right, thank you, Ed.
Thank you, John.
Well, I don't think I recognized them before. I just want to at least acknowledge that they're here. Two people that I work very closely with up in Albany couldn't be here, Senator Terrence Murphy and Senator Sue Serino. They couldn't be here in person, but they do have representatives of their staff. I know we have Lori Noel here from Senator Murphy's office, as well as I think Jackie Navi, if she's not here right now, she was popping in and out from Senator Sue Serino's office, so I just want to make sure I said that. And then how about our town supervisor of Putnam Valley, Sam? Would you mind coming up and give some remarks?
I want to thank you all for being here. I think it's terrific, the outreach. In my political career, it spans over 25 years, I've not seen this type of outreach. And Kevin, you're a hands-on individual as a representative for our area, and it's much appreciated. Two big concerns in the town of Putnam Valley. We got hit terribly by both the nor'easter and the tornadoes back in May. We actually had a tornado go right through, devastated a small community, Florida and the States, ripped down so many poles. The governor picked our town as a photo op. He stood in front of the worst destroyed area because we were that badly hit. And it was a big disappointment because at the end of the governor's talk, he pulled various representatives aside and said, what can we do for you? And I asked him, I said, declare this a disaster area, please, because we can get some money then from the government, you know, FEMA and stuff like that, and state as well. And he refused to do it. And I'm asking you gentlemen and your fellow assembly people and also the senators that when a disaster like that happens, we're a small town. I survive on a $14 million budget, and that's 100 miles of roads, you know, all the various attributes that you have to provide a community to make the community desirable. And when a storm like that hits, and we have to repair culverts and roads and bridges, I mean, we're talking a very limited budget, and it's very difficult. When Superstorm Sandy hit, we were able to get, you know, emergency money because it was declared a disaster area. I don't understand the difficulty in this past storm. It devastated so many communities. I'm talking the one in May and also the nor'easter. You know, in March, we had 2 major events, and neither one was declared a disaster to enable the towns to apply for some assistance. And believe me, every representative here I know have tough budgets to put together during this time of the year. You know, outside, our town general came in at minus 1.8 this year, but I add my improvement districts and my fire department, we're up to 2.8. And it doesn't sound like a lot, but you know, that breaks the cap if you put them all together. And where did that come from? The expenditures we had in our highway department and our improvement districts, because their beaches got wrecked. There was so much that went on. If we had some aid to help us regroup and restructure our town after these disasters, it would have been a big help. So I ask you as our most local representatives, in time of these emergencies, if you could press the governor's office to please sign that paper to declare it an emergency, you would be doing a great deal of assistance for these communities, including the town of Putnam Valley. And again, that's the main point that I have. The state's been good to our town, I have to say that. We have great representatives. Kevin and Sue Serino have advocated for my particular town quite a bit. But this was a big letdown. And the governor just stared me straight in the face and just said, we're not doing that. You have the National Guard. The National Guard, they came down. We had about 30 National Guards people, God bless them. But what could they do? They had no equipment. Our highway crew was out with their own equipment. The county was out with their equipment. I mean, they helped us bring water from the NYSEG water delivery and ice delivery point, to our town. That was great. But outside of that, everything fell on the backs of my highway crew. And these are great men and women. And, they spend 16, 18, 20-hour days sometimes trying to, get the town up and running again. So if you could keep that in mind, and that's really common. And again, I thank you so much for being here to listen, because it's important. And if you can take that message back to your comrades up there and your fellow assembly people and senators, that, in time of disaster, any assistance we can get monetarily to help us with our budgets would be much appreciated.
Thank you.
Sam.
Thank you.
Go ahead. Sam,
Yeah, sure.
I certainly sympathize with your situation, because we just had a couple of storms in our area. One was actually declared a FEMA disaster over 8 counties, and then in another few towns in one of my smaller counties too. In one of my counties is like 97,000 people. Geographically, it's bigger than the state of Rhode Island, 1,400 square miles, and they had a lot of damage. And what we pressed on one thing I think the state was good about, they did, because I know with the DOT, our regional director said if we, with the town, we can come in and do work up to $50,000. But they were state, and then after that they were getting billed. The towns were getting billed for some of the work that the state was providing, but the state did go in there and provide, with equipment. I saw it firsthand how they were providing that assistance. But if after you got above that threshold, then for the equipment, if it was rocks, there would be a bill that they would have to go. But the state was in there trying to help with the labor part of it. And they should be doing that if they have the capability to do that. And one of the other challenges we have with the FEMA disaster declaration, the feds only reimburse 75%, right, and then the rest is state and local match, local share. What we've pressed upon, we've had instances in those stitches, there's precedent for this, where the state has picked up the local share. So the towns, or the local municipalities that pick it up. There's precedent for that. Under Superstorm Sandy that happened. Mm-hmm. I know one of the communities where I represent, it happened. We're trying to get them to do the same thing again for this recent flooding we had. Because it would help. So one, it provides assistance to the property taxpayer, so it doesn't fall on their shoulders.
Absolutely.
But
Absolutely.
On the other case, we have in the small town, because they had some serious disaster damage. I saw a culvert in the road was totally disintegrated. But because even it was significant for them, it wouldn't meet that federal disaster declaration. So they said there's no way we're going to apply because it wouldn't make that threshold. But there has been precedent, and I brought this up to the governor's people. Whether it happens or not, I don't think it's going to happen, but we certainly ask, because there has been precedent where the state has come in even when there wasn't a federal FEMA disaster declaration, and so not just picking up the local share, they came in even though there was a disaster, came in and picked up the share. And I know it happened in 2000 from a flooding, and happened in 2013. Was paid in 2014 for the Mohawk Valley and Sullivan County. There's some storms that damaged the state. So that's the point we try to make now. Whether the governor, agrees with that, that's a whole other issue. But we made the case. But there's precedent for that happening. But even when they can't, the local DOT should be able to communicate with the towns that need work, and they have those agreements where they can go in there without an agreement for up to $50,000 work, but they stayed in there and kept doing work, and so those types of things would be helpful if the state needs. So,
during those times of disaster, and I know my fellow supervisors within Westchester and Putnam, we met together to discuss these things with NYSEG and some other organizations. When they occur, you're not only dealing with infrastructure damage, but you're dealing with your residents who are scared and cold usually, because that's when the power seems to go out the most during, time where it's winter or early spring. It's a true quality of life issue, and anything the state can do, and the federal government especially, to assist towns in circumstances like that would be such a great help. It really would, and it would reassure residents that, listen, you're not in it alone. And many times that's what we felt like. I'd be up at the highway department with my superintendent, who's an awesome guy, Larry Cobb, and be sitting with Larry, and he goes, "The guys are getting worn out, Sam. What are we going to do?" I said, "As best we can. They need to rest too." And it's tough. And equipment breaks. We got to pay for it. The overtime, we got to pay for it. The salt, the plowing, everything we have to pay for. And it would have been a great help if it could have been declared a FEMA disaster, because most of that would have been reimbursed,
Right.
Even 75%.
It's better than you're right.
Yeah.
And that's why when we found that instance where they did do it, it came in and helped even when there wasn't a FEMA disaster declaration. That's the case we're trying to push right now. So listen, you've done it. There's precedent, but I think that certainly there could be better effort done by the DOTs. I've seen some positive things, in our area where they're in there helping those municipalities out on that issue of because I know when something like that happens, you're all under a tax cap too.
Oh yeah.
So,
absolutely.
and this issue's come up, and when we brought up one issue, I had one of my colleagues said no, but I'll bring it up anyway because it's come up. But like with the tax cap, you talk about exemptions, and the governor doesn't like to do exemptions for the tax cap for anything, and I understand that why in some instances, but for one capital type of projects, capital improvement projects, but also for like a flooding or disaster or a storm or disaster recovery type effort, with something like that, if that was like a disaster type of thing, being exempt from the tax cap, is that something that you think that would be?
Oh, I can tell you, if I could exempt the expenses that we put out in March for the nor'easter and then the tornado in May, I would be in a negative tax increase area. It would reduce my overall budget easily 2, 3, 4%. That's how much we spent. We had a truck rollover. We had to repair that. I mean, you're talking hundreds of thousands, on repairs, on front end loader that went down, all during the storm. I mean, it's tough. So yes, absolutely. If we didn't have to include that and separate the emergency responses that we had out of our budget, it would have been great.
That came up, I know, I think the idea was first brought to us when we were down, I think, in
I love that
Nassau
idea.
County.
That would be a big help in future years, as the weather seems to change.
I was going to ask that. You kind of just answered it, Sam. Do you have an idea of what that total cost increase from dealing with both storms? Probably had a lot of overtime costs. I mean, I know you were working nonstop because I think I stopped by and I saw you and Larry when we had one of those
You stopped
one of those
quite a bit,
infamous
matter of
NYSEG
fact.
calls.
Yeah.
And you've been a tremendous advocate for the town. Also, I know this isn't about the power outages, but that's definitely a very serious issue to everyone here in Hudson Valley, particularly on this side of the river. And I remember even seeing you at the Public Service Commission's public statement hearings, and I really appreciate you being an advocate for that.
There's two old sayings that I think every highway superintendent knows. And the first is, the very first thing your taxpayers see in the morning are your roads. If your roads are not good, that starts a bad day. The second one is that the roads are not Republican or Democrat.
Right.
The roads are simply roads, and you got to maintain them. You got to keep them open. Our costs between the two disasters, the nor'easter especially, because we also had the death of that little boy when that tree fell in the house, and we couldn't get to it. Roads were blocked, and wires down, and everything else. The cost monetarily was $475,000 extra above our budget. $475,000 that we have to devote to that on the repairs, the overtime, the salting, the reconstruction of a bridge that went down, and a bunch of culverts. And that's a lot of money for us. It really is.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
I think I saw Mike Bruin here from Brewster. Mike, did you want to come up and a few remarks? Highway Superintendent of Town of Southeast.
First off, thanks for having me. Thanks for putting this on. Keep that. There's a few things I'd like to touch on. Number one would be probably any of the projects that we get. I have a Bridge New York project that we're working on currently, and it is a bear of a job to get through the paperwork for this thing. I would dare say probably, I'm taking an estimate on this, but between a quarter and a third of the cost of my project is going to engineering. It's, in my opinion, excessive. It was a culvert replacement that the DOT puts us through a very specific regimen of requirements to get the funding, number one. And then number two, when you get it, the fund really starts. So if we could ease that process a little bit, I think that we could get a lot of these projects done more cost effectively, more efficiently, and much quicker, for sure. I really anticipated, I got this funding almost over a year ago, and I expected to complete the project this year, and we're not even through the engineering process. So I'd be happy to work our way just step by step through this process that I just went through, and see if there was some way that we could streamline it in the future.
Certainly, not to interrupt you, any suggestions you have on how that can be done, we'd love it if you'd share that with us as we'll make recommendations. So, or if you're talking with your fellow colleagues and other highway superintendents, that would be helpful to have. If we're getting some feedback from other people, that'd be great. It sounds like you're since you're right in the middle of that.
All right, I'll take some notes and we'll see if we can't work something out. I'm going to bounce around a little bit. I made a few notes. I didn't know exactly how this meeting was going to go, but I see it's kind of an open forum for a number of things. It's I heard you talking a little bit before about culverts. I've probably got 15 or 20 miles of rotten corrugated metal pipe in my town that's attached to about 3,000 catch basins. Probably a quarter of them are in the process of failing. It's a massive cost to the town, and we've been looking for grant money for about 2.5 years for a couple of different projects. It's a cost that no one wants to incur on the specific neighborhood that this lies in, so you try to spread it out throughout the entire town and be fair about it. But I haven't even been able to find any kind of low-interest loans, trying to stay within the tax cap. We talk from time to time about bonding this thing, but they talk about bonding almost as though it's free money, and obviously people don't recognize that it's a loan that you have to pay back, and it's whether you place it in A, B, or C account, you're still breaking a tax cap. So if I bond $1 million a year to do culvert replacement for 5 or 10 years, it's costing each and every taxpayer in my town that money. You gotta pay it back. So it's not squandering it, but it's gotta come out of somebody's pocket. So there's gonna be a tax increase. CHIPS funds are convenient. There's just not enough of them. You know, essentially I get enough just to, you probably all know about the dollar and cents. If we do a 2-inch blacktop cap on an existing road, 24 feet wide, would run you around $140,000 to $160,000 a mile. So most of our towns could blacktop 2 miles out of 80, 90 out of almost 100 miles of road. It's when you put it in that perspective, I think it's a little easier to see. You're doing 2, put it on 1.5 inches thick and for 1 inch thick and spread it a little more, so maybe you get 3 miles of road out of your top and expend all your CHIPS money. You got a little EWR money, or there's Pave New York, you get a couple bucks, but it's all helpful. I'm not trying to be negative, I'm trying to be positive, but it's a little light. I'd like to address, going off that subject for a second, the state working with the state. I know there's been a lot of talk about shared services, as we all know. We work real hard on that. At my level, we've been working with all surrounding towns as long as I've been there for 5 years, and we've been making very good progress in working with the state, the county. The county's always been a great asset. Our surrounding towns have all been really very good. Where we've made a little progress, or actually a lot of progress, is in emergency situations with NYSEG. There was a lot of problems during emergencies where we couldn't get our roads open because there was an inability to make safe. I got a call from a NYSEG representative this afternoon. We have a possibility of an extreme storm this weekend, and he reached out to me, let me know that they're going to be at their command center, that if anything happens, that they're there to help, and we have cell numbers now where we can call people 24 hours a day. There's been some progress, and like I said, I've seen you at Top Center many times. We've worked during these. We can't wait till there is an emergency to react to it. So things are getting a little better, but I would like to rely on the state for certain things, and that said would be training. And I said all along that if we can, the state is great at mandating, and whether it's anything from required OSHA training or pest training, or they have safety set up for virtually everything. And I'd like to see that shared with the local towns. It's a bear for me to tackle just the required training alone for my men and say, do we have everything covered for the year? That I would reach out to the state for that. I would reach out to the state for maybe help with engineering certain projects and keep our costs down and streamline them to their into the state needs that they're so well aware of. So that's where I would reach out to you. One of the last things I'd like to talk about is the local roads and the state roads. In emergency, I think we're all aware, if a road closes, we use another road. But in my situation, I'm at the hub of some pretty intense highways, 684, 84, Route 6, 202, and 22. And they all center right in my town. And when anything happens on the interstates, be it an accident or be it a weather event, the governor closes Interstate 84, we get inundated. And we need help at the time of these storms. I'll take some of my men where they don't even have places to park tractor trailers. They'll get off at exit 18, exit 19, exit 20, and just tractor trailers driving around local roads packing snow, looking for a place to park. And I took, in many storms, even last year, my trucks, I have responsibility of International and Independent Way, International Boulevard and Independent Way at exit 19. And I'll send a truck over to widen the state roads, to open the roadways up to Home Depot, where they've been gracious enough to let the trucks park overnight, anywhere we can get them off the roadway. And I would reach out to the state to help us in a situation like that, or at least give us the opportunity to say, we need the help. There needs to be communication. And there was really never any communication. The communication I got back was from my drivers in that area who do those roads and say, the tractor trailers are blocking all the roads. Oh, I can't plow my roads. So that would be something that I'd like to see addressed. And I'm just going to touch on this briefly because the state has made changes. The state made a change last year. They reduced the southbound lane from 684 or Route 22 south to 684 south at the 84 interchange, from 2 lanes southbound to 1 lane. And it apparently is going to be a permanent change. The ramps from east and westbound 84 merge onto 684, so they reduced the southbound lanes to 1 permanent lane. What it's done is it's taken the traffic off of 84 over on 121. They divert down Route 6. They get off at exit 1 in Connecticut. They divert down Route 6. They go up Star Ridge Road. They inundate our local roads for a 1-lane closure that's going to apparently be permanent. I don't think there was enough thought that was given to what's going to happen to our local roads. It's so bad that in the mornings, I personally travel down 22. I go north on Route 22 to avoid the backup from the excessive backup during rush hour. I go north on 22, down 312, and take local roads to circumvent the traffic jams each and every morning. So just reaching out because it seems to be the what it's doing to alleviate the traffic on the interstates. It's putting extra wear and tear on all of my local roads and creating undue traffic jams.
Mike, just to kind of go back just a little bit, I know, and Phil can say this too, one of the things you mentioned was extreme winter recovery money, Pave New York money, CHIPS money. Something we fight for as a conference is lumping them in together, because every time we go through budget season in Albany, there's a bit of a fight because the governor cuts the extreme winter recovery money, says it's not a cut, it's a one-time shot. And then every single time we have that orange C come back up to Albany, and then we have to fight to restore that money that people are trying to budget on, and local town officials are trying to budget on those dollars, and you really want to know, like, need some consistency so you can plan. And I think we've spoken a little bit about some of the mapping with CHIPS. I was wondering if you could talk about that too.
I'm going to bring that up.
Okay.
That was one of the last things I saved.
Oh, all right.
And what actually took place on that was I believe 3 years ago, New York State produced, or they went through this whole GIS remapping system of all the roads in the state. We here in the southern portion of the state were the first portion to get completed. And when I got what we call an LHI, a local, local highway inventory, I'm sorry, it lists each and every road that we have, the total length, And what New York State did was they maintained that they had a highly accurate, and for the most part, the new numbers that I checked with the digital mileage meter that I have are extremely accurate. So that we're at a point where they did map the roads correctly. But what they did was they originally left out all the cul-de-sacs, and then they came back and they addressed that to a point that if it was a open cul-de-sac without a center island, they gave you X number of miles for that. All that has to be maintained, paved, and plowed. Additionally, what they did was if they found that your roads were shorter, they deducted the mileage, just took it right off your LHI. If they found that your roads were longer, they made a little note in the LHI that said that you could apply for this mileage change. And I just found it to be extremely unfair. If you have determined the roads to be a specific length, many people had a plus and a minus, but all we got were minuses. They were very quick to take your mileage away. I think I lost 3 or 4 miles that one year, and there were 5 or so that you could be added. And the process is pretty grueling. You have to go through a resolution with the town board to readdress the lengths of the road. Some roads that weren't even on my LHI fought for 2 or 3 years to get on the LHI, and the roads in their entirety. And the LHI shows that they're there, shows that they were measured, and it shows that they could be added to your system if you take the time and jump through the hoops to do so. So I just think that in all fairness, it could have just been, this is what we found your roads to be, this is what they are at this point. Any dispute, please bring it to our attention. It would have been a much fairer way of doing things. On a positive note, though, I was told by the people in the DOT that although they've made all these changes to the numbers in our LHI, that they did not change our CHIPS funding based on these numbers for the past 3 years. It looks like the next year or two they're going to administer all those changes, and that will actually, so if 3 years ago we had 80 miles of road, those are the numbers regardless of what the actual amount is, whether it went up 9 or down 3. The CHIPS funding didn't change at all for the 3 years, which in my case was unfair because I think we increased our roads 7 or 8 miles, so we never got the benefit for that. And there will be obviously nothing retroactive, but I'd like to see them, since they've all been accurately calculated, I'd just like to see them base it on what we actually have.
Base it on what they have, and let's not penalize you either. Well, hold harmless, you know. At least if it's going to be moving forward, let's keep you at least at a minimum where you're at. Let's not be taking it away from you. And then, like I said, if they can come in and take it away from you, if you found where they made a mistake, and why can't you just go back and add it on? Why do you have to jump through hoops to get it added back on?
It would have seemed like the fair way to doing things for certainly.
All right, thanks, Mike.
Good.
Thank you very much. Especially if you take all the lane changes when you turn the turning lanes, they're taking them all away too. They take away all those turning lanes. I know they're taking out one of the areas we heard about with the mapping is where there's turning lanes, so you get off or exit, and the turning lanes, they've taken those away from the towns, and they lose mileage and reimbursement from that perspective as well.
Moving along. I see Mike Simone, Highway Superintendent from Town of Carmel. Mike? if there's anyone else from Carmel.
Good evening, gentlemen. And,
It's my highway
thank-
superintendent, by the way.
I got you here. And I want to thank you guys for coming down here. I'm one of those orange shirts and have been for the last 20 years coming up there to advocate. And I thank you for your advocation of our needs and to continue it. I will ask you that, as we have every year, we definitely need more funding in our CHIPS fund. My town has been very strong. My residents are very strong in helping with their own local roads, and they will put money forth within the budget. And as my former highway superintendents have stated, CHIPS funding is probably between 30 and 35% of our funding. But having 180 miles of road, extra funding would definitely help out. And in lieu of the tax caps that we have, it would be greatly funded. It would be greatly helped. I like the idea that you brought forward. Our bridges are in terrible condition. Putnam County, we don't have a lot of bridges. I only have one in my town, but separating the culverts out, I think, is something that needs to be done, because we definitely need our bridge money, but we also need our culvert money. You have 36, 48, 5-foot culverts that you got to replace. It's expensive, it's costly, and a lot of them were probably built in this lower Hudson Valley area somewhere in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. You know they're falling apart. And to have funding for that would be great. Not just to have the CHIPS funding, but to have that also. I'm in agreement with you. The emergency weather recovery and the paved New York is great, but you know what? Put it all into CHIPS. It's the same formula. We need to have it. We can't say that we got a bad winter this year, we got a good winter. We need to know that we have that money, we can count on it going forward. And I think the taxpayers need to know that also. So,
I think the governor's going to be a little reluctant to cut the CHIPS funding, but he remove, like Kevin said, he can remove the winter recovery. Say, I'm not cutting CHIPS, but I'm cutting aid to local municipalities because you become used to that money. Same thing with paved New York, which expires in 2 years. I mean, then what happens? It becomes a zero unless something else happens. And if we can get into that base aid, that's been the main advocacy, as you know, has been coming up. And I can't tell you enough. Thank you for making that trip up to Albany. We have 700 highway superintendents with orange shirts with the Local Roads Matter campaign. It's effective. It sends a message, and that's part. The success we've had over the past 6 years is really attributed to you guys making that trip up. It's not where we want it to be, but when you look at where we were 6 years ago with that first CHIPS increase and then PAVE and these other things, we've calculated like every municipality in the state is between CHIPS, PAVE New York, and extreme weather recovery. What they're getting now is about 50 to 55% more than what they were getting 6 years ago. But it's not enough because there's too much unmet need out there. But your advocacy is tremendously important and helpful, so I appreciate you guys making the trip.
Thank you. Thank you.
And that's when we were talking about the formula with I think I saw you nodding with that threshold of $250,000 raising that. You said that would be a good idea. That would be helpful.
Great idea to raise it up to $500,000 because it allows the local municipalities with their local engineering firms to do a lot of the work, which is something I think that a lot of local municipalities have very skilled workers that can do this work. So yeah, it would be great.
Other question, and I know I mentioned it briefly when we were talking, and I know Kevin's talked about it a lot, with the water and sewer infrastructure. That's a challenge for our municipalities as well, as you all know. And like I said, I was mentioning earlier, one of our colleagues has legislation to create a CHIPS-like formula for water and sewer, but how putting that forth and kind of planning that out, quantifying that's, I think, the challenge. If you have any suggestions on how that might work, I mean, I guess you can look at the miles of road and where, how much pipe you have.
I can tell you the town of Carmel has 12 water districts and 8 sewer districts within it. And we are working extensively right now. We have a water system 2 up in Carmel that has been in existence for probably 75 years. We have 52 miles of road that could be adversely effective if we have to replace most of the mains. Most of our mains are old galvanized lines that have now gone from 6-inch mains to probably less than 2-inch. So we're looking at an extensive amount of money that, again, the residents have to pay, but if we can get help from the state on this, and both paving, again, these are our roads too that have to be dug up, and, but the infrastructure, also sewer and water, is something that's very important in my area. As you go closer to the lower Hudson Valley and toward New York City, you're gonna see more extensive water and sewer projects, I think, and any help would be greatly appreciated.
Well, Mike, I know, I'm glad you brought up the culverts, because as we travel the state, it was interesting. There was some places I had someone nudge me and go, "What's a culvert?" But the reality is, we hear about these tragedies, and what Phil said earlier about let's be not responsive, let's be proactive. When you hear about a tragedy when a bridge collapses, right, it's awful, and you don't want that to happen. But a culvert can be massive, and you could be driving over a culvert and you think it's a bridge. So, and that's something that, depending on where you're driving, you can see that. So, I just want to thank you for bringing that up. Thank you. Thank you.
Mike, are you guys experiencing the issue that I was talking about? I brought up, I think when one of the other speakers was up, relative to the MWB threshold at 30%. Are you running into problems with that, whether it's from the professional side of it, or whether it's on the contracting side of the construction side?
Yes, I was fortunate enough to apply for a federal grant, and then got brought down to the state, and the state then oversaw it, and the thresholds that you have to jump through are quite extensive. And I will agree that you do have to go out well outside your area to get expertise to work on these. And I think that the threshold of some of the engineering byproducts, or engineering, not byproduct, but engineering facilities needs to be brought down to a local level that they can handle it. As long as they can handle it, then you can have it done there, rather than reach out and have to go off of a small select list of whether it be engineering and survey work that needs to be brought out from well outside of your area. That you bring these guys in that have no idea of what's going on in your town. Not that they're not great engineers, but it's very burdensome and very time consuming. So.
That's the frustrating part about it, is because you want to hire local labor, you want to bring in your local people to do it, and we're finding that people are being excluded from that because they can't they don't have the population to meet that threshold, and they are going out of, like, so a lot of our people had to go down to New York City or Long Island, and one actually mentioned they had to go to Pennsylvania. So it's very difficult, very expensive, it adds cost to the project and challenging.
Yes, yes.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you.
Mike. Appreciate it very much.
John, if I may throw in, talking about the sewer and water infrastructure. In York County, we've had a condition come up. There was one area where we had 7 lines break in 3 days, and there was a pressure problem because of a rock jam in one of the valves, so that they need to do some valve replacements in that area. But the real issue that we came across is a lot of those pipes were this asbestos pipe. So they had the asbestos in them, and all of a sudden you have Board of Health involved on it, which of course, asbestos, we all know the dangers there, but it was talked about your hoops to jump through. At one point they wanted them to have hoses run from a different water source to all of the different homes in the area. It would have been probably $250,000 for garden hose to run it, which really isn't. You're not supposed to use for potable water anyway. But there's going to be that on the horizon. Now, we've already been looking at relining pipes and doing some projects. The unfortunate thing, the formula to try to do it. I was talking to one of our old timers in town that Kevin knows pretty well, Tony Grasso, who sat on our board back in the 70s, I believe. And Tony basically said that after John Downing died, no one knew where any of the pipes were because he had them all in his head. He laid them in their pipes. They said they were all running all over the place. So we don't even really have accurate mapping on some of the pipings going under, like by FDR and some of the fields in York County. So there are definitely going to be some major infrastructure issues with the water and plumbing and sewer in this area. We're actually looking to sewer more homes in York County. We have, we've been able to raise the limits on the sewer plant, but, you know, we're talking a $20 million project. It's you know, it's out there, there's some East of Hudson money that we have, so we're looking at using that, but trying to throw these pieces together. We're at a point where we could really do some great things to improve the quality of water, get all of the, I think it's somewhere around 350 homes out of septic and into sewer. But, you know, we're coming on that stumbling block. You know, where are we going to come up with this without blowing the cap, killing the people that are coming into the system? It's been quite a challenge.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Let's see here. I know we got other people here that aren't on this list, so again, we'll open it up at the end. We have Tony, sorry, I don't want to pronounce his name, the Gorman Group? We got Gorman Group. That.
That would be Tony Scicciarini, nice Irish name.
Thank you, Tony.
I work for the Gorman Group out of Albany. We specialize in pavement preservation processes. We like to try and educate highway superintendents and the public on taking care of your good roads. It's much like waxing a new car, changing any oil in a new car. You want to keep your good roads good and take care of your old roads secondarily. We push pavement preservation to a great extent. Prior to going to work for Gorman, I was a highway superintendent for the better part of 2 decades over in Orange County, so I know a lot about what these guys are going through. I see we've got some very capable highway superintendents in this room. We talked about culvert pipes under the CHIPS program. Most of these guys have been replacing culvert pipes on their own without assistance from the state for years. I don't believe there's a big need for engineering. Most of them are bought pre-engineered from a vendor. So any red tape that you could cut is certainly going to help them out, and it's going to leave more money for culvert pipe replacement instead of supporting other industries that are going to make money off of it that probably don't need their assistance. You asked about CHIPS, what could make things easier. I've heard complaints, because I deal with 99% of my customers are highway superintendents. When the Thruway Authority gave up administering the CHIPS program and it went to the comptroller's office, they made the reimbursement policy a bit more cumbersome. Used to be in the old days they just accepted a copy of a signed voucher as the highway superintendent's word that the work was done and the money was sent. Now they have to wait for a canceled check to come back from the bank. They have to send photocopies of the check. So it's added, in most cases, by the time we finish the work and get a bill to them, they get the voucher signed, get it back to us. It adds a couple months to the process of reimbursement for them, and that's kind of tied their hands to some extent. It gets late in the year and they can't get some work done because they're afraid they won't get their reimbursements back. I was at the original advocacy day. I haven't missed one since. You guys are in a tough spot. The governor's imposed a 2% tax cap, which has taken communities that, a handful of communities, I would believe, that had very high reserves, and it's forced communities that were already very fiscally responsible to spend down their reserves. And it's been long enough now that most of them are at the point where they're starting to cut services because there's nothing left to do. And the cap is like Social Security. It's a third rail. Nobody wants to touch it. So you guys are in a tough spot. Every year we go up in March and we're there at the same time the schools are. And the schools are looking for money, and it's a choice. Who do you pick? I know that highway superintendents run the leanest operations of any municipal operation there are. If they ran like schools, there'd be 7 deputy highway superintendents, 14 foremen, and 2 laborers. They are very, very understaffed at the highway department level. They're usually ill-equipped at the highway department level. And while we know it's just plain fair, I know the position you guys are in, because everybody's up there, everybody's got a union, everybody's got people looking out for their interests, so I appreciate where you're at, but the bottom line is the infrastructure is the lifeblood of the state. It is something that the average person in the public does not grasp because they can't see it. They can appreciate this. Keeps the rain off their head, keeps the wind off their back. When they're driving down the road, they're driving on the roof. They have no idea of the value what's underneath it. And it's the most expensive asset any community has. And it's dramatically underfunded. It was underfunded for years. The 2% tax cap has maybe brought some short-term relief to the taxpayer, but when those hundreds of miles of pipe that are under the ground start to deteriorate and the roads start caving in, you're gonna have to pay for it. So at some point, the public's gonna pay for it. So I would prefer it was a little at a time instead of all at once, because Mike was very, very eloquent in his bonding statement. Somebody's paying the interest just because it's a shell game. It is a tax. It's just not called a tax against the tax cap. But the public's paying hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in interest every year that they shouldn't have to pay. This is an odd note, but it happened to me on the way over here, and I know all these guys are experiencing it. We live in a very IT-orientated world today, and every car has GPS. In the old days, you looked at your map and you plotted your route. Today, your car does it for you, and it's probably tripled the amount of traffic that these guys see on their local roads that aren't designed for it because their car is telling somebody, go through this neighborhood because you're going to save 28 seconds on the trip. So a street that might have had 10 houses on it and saw 6 cars a day might be seeing 75 cars a day today because the people don't know any better. Their cars tell them to go that way. It's a shortcut. So it's put another undue strain on their local infrastructure that it was never designed for. And that's about all I have. I could go on forever, but I appreciate you guys taking the time to come down and listen. And thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tony.
Tony, can I ask you to do one thing for me if you want? I'm not putting you on the spot because we talked about this so many times, and it has to do, Tony and I spoke many times about public expectation. And we agree wholeheartedly that years ago, people used to drive on a blanket of snow and they were very happy. It was a storm and they were reasonable about their expectations of what the roads would be like during a blizzard. After a storm, there would be a reasonable amount of time to clear or to plow and to sand where necessary. The public expectation has increased so many-fold over the last few years to where I get complaints during blizzards where the roads are actually legally closed. They're turning off traffic off the interstate highways onto our local roads. And I get calls in my highway department, why aren't my local roads better? And they expect wet roads throughout the storm, after the storm, the increase in the salts to our environment, the increase to the salts that are destroying our roadways. We have roadways that Tony and I, what reminded me of it was we had this discussion so many times about the pavement lasted longer. You used a tenth the amount of salts. You didn't use calcium chloride. You didn't use pre-treatment. It eats the roads, it eats the pipes, it eats the concrete. The concrete pipes, our catch basins are falling apart. And it's something that maybe a public education and outreach to people that would understand that if you reduce your speed during these storms, give the men the roads clear enough to do our job. It's become more and more and more difficult every year. Tony, if you'd like to enhance on that, because I know you and I had that conversation.
Michael, I don't think you left anything out. I think you did. Mike's right. I mean, I tell these guys all the time, their job today is to make sure everybody that has ball tires and doesn't know how to drive can get wherever they want to go 24/7. It's a tall order. It's a very tall order.
Tony, other question, can I ask this question at the beginning, and it has come up, where some people have said the CHIPS criteria, the way it is fine the way it is. But others have said if you give us a little flexibility, I know you mentioned about the reimbursement part of it, but if there's certain applications or certain things that, like one town said, that if we could do this type of work, and maybe it doesn't necessarily meet the 10-year useful life, but it would allow us to do some important work that would help the drivers in our community.
The 10-year restriction on some surface treatments, I mean, chip sealing is one of the cheapest processes there are for sealing roads today. And I believe chip sealing, they have dropped it to 5 years. 5 years, and that's been a big help. Back to where we started before, even asphalt that you buy today isn't anywhere near the quality that it was 20 years ago. The lifespan of a road has gone from probably a resurfaced road from 25 years to, you're lucky if you get 10 nowadays. So 10's not a bad number, but there are some processes that I think should be looked at maybe and shorten up the time frame on.
So you said chip sealing is 5 years?
Chip sealing, I think they have it at 5 years now.
So now that's still eligible? It's still eligible for CHIPS funds?
Yes.
You use it, okay.
Yep.
If you have any other suggestions on that, let us know.
Sure.
Please.
Thank you. And moving along, how about we have from the Highway Rehab Corp, Mike Haggerty.
Yes.
Mike.
Like Tony, I also work for a pavement preservation corporation, and we do hot place recycling. I also sit on the board for the Northeast Pavement Preservation Partnership, which is comprised of all the Northeast DOTs. And again, Tony pretty much, I got to mirror all his comments. We're kind of in the same boat. The biggest thing, the thing that I can add is, we've watched the CHIPS program, grow over the years, but let's face it, when it was first implemented, it was probably underfunded then. And with the price of materials every year going up, we can't keep up with the increase and the roads going bad, the ratio. So, basically it's help, it's appreciated, these guys really rely on it. But we need to keep it growing every year, and more so than what it's been funded in the past. And we all know this. I know it's a battle for you guys, but we're probably never going to catch up. But we got to keep the effort going, and I think you guys are doing that for us. I know that superintendents in New York State are obviously big advocates on Advocacy Day. I've been there every year since it's been implemented, except for last. But as Tony said, we're all in the same boat. We're trying to get processes, educate these guys to help them preserve their payments, help them to preserve what they've already paid for out there. So we have some pretty neat disciplines of recycling and surface treatment disciplines to do just that. Because let's face it, these guys don't get the monies like they used to, or don't have the monies to rebuild from the bottom up. So we're trying to just preserve what's out there. Other than that, I mean, that's Tony pretty much said everything else, and that's all I have as far as just keep the money coming.
I have a question.
Yep.
This was brought up at our meeting in Buffalo,
Mm-hmm.
and it was individuals from Gurnett, and they were talking about, I think it's a lawsuit that they filed against the DEC, because I think it's environment, I think it was maybe Environmental Law 206, and I think I dealt with the recycling issue, that
Okay.
that basically restrict how that would work. Is that anything you're familiar with? I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I wish I had the
No, that's nothing probably we'd be involved with. They're probably talking about maybe putting recycle asphalt back into the virgin mix, I would think. And that's been a popular thing over the years, with putting back maybe 15 to 20% of stuff they're taking off the roads back into the plants. And that's what Tony was referring to. We don't have the integrity of the hot mixes that we did years ago. You're not getting the longevity out of them like we did back then, because either they're putting these recycled material back in there, and it's actually kind of a drier mix. And also, the asphalts have changed that we've been importing over the years too. We're not getting the quality stuff that we had years ago, so we're kind of getting bottom of the barrel stuff. But yeah, again, you know, the asphalts that were laid down 20 years ago, you were probably getting a 20 or 25 year span out of it now, 10 to 15 if you're lucky. So it kind of keeps us busy to, you know, we're kind of reconstituting it, rejuvenating it, and you know, trying to save these guys some monies, and then putting the surface treatments like the Gorman Group does on top to, you know, spread the budgets that these guys have much further to do more work.
Do you guys see any changes in the technology? I mean, obviously the goal is to preserve the pavement, but changes in the technology that can help maybe, you know, it's probably costly along with it, to help maybe when they're doing a project that lasts longer than it normally would. Is there any changes that you're seeing that's being worked on that can help in that?
Well, I think, yes. I mean, there's always, you know, we're always looking at ways to better our processes, those guys as well. But in the hot mixes themselves, they're, you know, experimenting with now polymers, to give you more flexibility in the pavement. So that would be the hot mix producers doing that. So there's, you know, there's always some type of, you know, technology input going on there, and you know, for the most part, a lot of it's working, and but you know, a lot of it's still a work in progress.
Thank you, Mike.
You're welcome.
Yeah, thank you very much.
I know we have a local materials plant in Hamlin and Carmel, Peckham, and I visited that plant, and they showed us all the polymer additives that they've added into the asphalt as well. So it's pretty interesting stuff. I think I have one of our local firefighters, and he's a paramedic, Steve Rivera. Steve, you want to talk about one of the things we talk about here too? Each task force meeting kind of takes its own shape to every region, right? So we talk about whether it's local issues, but also about you know, what other things that we see, and public safety always comes up too. So, Steve, I know as a first responder, is there anything you'd like to add about transportation and what you've seen?
Just wanted to note that we've been following a lot your Route 6 project and the repaving from Tilly Foster up towards the library. That's a main thoroughfare for Putnam Hospital for us. We use that road dozens of times a day. And every little bit of every road, every bump, every pothole, every crack, we feel it, our patients feel it. Some of these roads are in such disrepair that it actually changes the way we treat and tend to our patients. Sometimes I have to rethink and reconsider life-saving treatments for these patients. Starting an IV on a normal day is like threading a needle. Now imagine starting to thread a needle in a bouncy castle with 20 kids jumping. That's what it's like going down a roadway, and some of these medications are life and death for these people. Some orthopedic injuries like hip fractures, leg fractures. I do my best with pillows, with blankets, with splints, but every day I tell my patients, I'm sorry, there's nothing more I can do for you. The roadways are what they are. These roads are rough and I can't control them. I did see, you know, the resurfacing Route 6, and I hope we do more of that in the community. Even if we start with just the main state roads, state roads are the main thoroughfares, and you'll see the best return on investment for us on our end. We do service for everybody and everything. There isn't anywhere we don't go, but we do tend to funnel from the state, from the local roads and from the county roads to the state roads. So those are our most heavily trafficked areas. Other than roads tonight, because I'm sure you guys like to hear something a little different, one thing that we've noticed is something that's super dangerous for us in our profession is intersections, traffic signals in particular. People don't see us. Our technology is getting better. We have LED lights. They're a lot brighter. We have better sirens, higher wattage. We're a lot louder. But for whatever reason, distracted driving, better insulated cars, we're just not being noticed. One device that I've seen is actually very successful is what's called a preemption device. And what it does is it is a sensor on the traffic signal when paired with a special light on our vehicles, which is a special wavelength of light, will change the traffic signal to a red for everyone else and a green for us. I don't see it being too expensive. I'm sure it's better than repaving a road. A little cheaper than doing that, but it would be huge for us. I personally have been involved in an ambulance wreck. It was very traumatic for myself, for my patient that was on board, for my driver that was on board, and anything that we could do to mitigate that would be huge on our end. I'd just also like to commend all the town highway departments, highway supervisors. When people need help, they call us. When we need help in a storm, we call you guys. You guys are paramount for us out there. Anytime when there's a snowstorm, you guys dig us out. Anytime there's a roadway that's blocked, whether it's a tree, power lines down, you guys do the best to mitigate for us. Any way we can get you guys funding during these disasters to help us is paramount. Other than that, thank you guys. I appreciate it. I hope we continue to make some progress that we've been making.
Thank you, Steve. Just sit tight for a little bit.
Just so you're a volunteer firefighter and also do the paramedic work?
I'm a volunteer fireman and a volunteer EMT in the Carmel Volunteer Ambulance Corps and Carmel Fire Department. I'm also a career paramedic for a commercial agency in Westchester, Putnam, Dutchess.
If you don't mind, I just want to take this minute to say thank you for what you do, because we see this over and over again. You know, I know FAST did a study. If the services our volunteers provide to our local communities were paid services, it would cost the property taxpayers over an additional $3 billion annually. So not only are you and your fellow volunteers looking out for the health and well-being of your neighbor and your community members, but you're also looking for the help for the property taxpayers. So thank you for your service for doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hey, Steve, the preemption device, is that something that you've actually seen implemented on any of the trucks that or rigs that you've worked on?
Yes, actually, down in the town of Greenberg Police Department uses it on a fly car that I've seen. Changed the traffic signal pretty quickly, and it was actually really remarkable to see. I don't know how that could be implemented maybe on major traffic signals. I don't imagine it being on every traffic light. I just can't see it now. Maybe, new traffic lights that put something on a new one, maybe a little more cost effective, but for example, Route 6 and Route 52, Library Corners is a very troublesome intersection for us. Route 312 and Route 6 right at the end of the new pavement. Very high traffic areas, multiple lanes of traffic. Traffic come from many directions. It would be a huge help for the safety of us and for the safety of the other motorists on the road.
So is a signal that comes off your vehicle to the device that
So
stops
it's a
person to red, or how does it work exactly?
So it's a restricted device. It's only available to police, fire, EMS, and it emits a special wavelength of light that is sensed by a sensor placed on the traffic signal. When the traffic signal recognizes this wavelength of light, it will turn the 3 other directions or however many other directions red. So it will turn every direction red except for the direction that it's coming from. That direction will turn green for us just to move the traffic that's in front of us at an intersection out of the way and to let us through. One of the barriers we face when we come to an intersection is that we may be 4 or 5 cars back at a light. The first 2 cars at the light, I'm not going through a red light. I can't go through a red light. We're gridlocked and we're stuck. There's nowhere for us to go. There's no physical place for us to move other vehicles, for us to go around. So that would actually move the traffic along a little bit, give us the right of way, and just kind of make it safer for the other motorists as well.
Pretty impressive technology. We heard that about the red light issue down in Long Island because they have the red light cameras, and they have like a whole line of trucks that won't move, and I'm not going through the light because the camera's going to get me if we're going through a red light, and then the first responders behind it can't do anything. They're stuck. They're waiting for the light to turn. But with the red light cameras, so we've heard it a lot. So that's interesting technology, though. I'd like to hear learn more about that. That's pretty good.
And Greenberg, that's an interesting outfit down there in Westchester, southern Westchester, because their police are their EMS, right, Steve?
Yeah,
They do both. It's unique.
The police agency does provide the emergency medical service and the law enforcement in the community, so it's a very interesting operation. It's very successful for them down there. It's very different than anything else around them. It seems to be working very successfully for them.
That's right. I just realized too, Steve, is our town councilman here, Pete D'Angelo. He's a retired police officer from Greenberg, right, Pete?
And
EMT. Do you know about this technology too? Not to put you on the spot.
I know they were coming out with it when I was before retired, so I don't know a lot about it. But if you want any information, I could look up to the radio letting people down.
Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
It's very interesting.
One question we tend to ask about too is that we've seen different serious accidents. The Taconic State Parkway is a very narrow parkway, right? But it's unique to our region because you don't really have a shoulder for most parts, right? And one thing that we changed in state law several years back, before I was a member, and we've since expanded it, is the move-over law for when our emergency service personnel are working on a scene. And I'm just curious, is that something that you find effective? Do people know that's the law? Sometimes there's challenges, maybe because you think there's nowhere for them to move, then that's a different scenario. But as far as public safety, is there anything you think we could do to increase awareness?
I've noticed on some traffic signage, the trailers, the orange trailers on the side of the highways, it's been posted, overhead boards, it's been posted. It's really great for the awareness getting out there. That is one of the #1 killer of first responders, regardless of discipline, police, fire, EMS, is being struck by a vehicle on a roadway. I've noticed that the state troopers out have been very, very, very proactive and aggressive about enforcement of the law, because as emergency services workers, we take that personally. I want to go home at the end of the day of my tour. No, I didn't sign up to get struck by a vehicle. I signed up to help people. I've noticed it has been quite a bit more effective. There are stragglers, there are outlier drivers that either don't know, aren't aware, possibly don't care. But I think the awareness campaigns are effective. I think they should be continued as well, maybe even increased. We have seen a return on them. They are effective.
Thank you, Steve. All right, we're good. Let me take a look here. I think we're through our list, so at this point, I'd like to just open it up to see if there's anybody else here that wasn't on our list that'd like to say a few words, ask a question, comments. All right, well, with that, I want to thank everybody. We got Jack Bress here. Jack is, what's your title? Great guy. Small guy, the Village of Brewster.
Yeah, okay.
Before I know what he's going to say.
No, you don't know what I'm going to say. I came to this meeting, first of all, I'm on the Southeast Planning Board. So I came to this meeting to get a little education on infrastructure and transportation. I did have full intentions of making a specific comment, and every single one of the highway department supervisors have already made the comment that I wanted to make. But I'm going to repeat myself. I think that it's all about money. I think it's about the government regulation on certain items. The cost of doing certain projects is overwhelming. I think that we could probably get a lot of work done if they'd cut back on the regulation. I think it's a key. And a good example is that we did a project in the Village of Brewster to do the honor roll for the veterans. We got a grant money for $12,000 and grant money for $5,000. $17,000 was plenty of money to do the whole entire project. After we went through the engineering, the regulations, the insurance, we got 1/4 of the project done. And I see the same thing happening with the highway, same thing happening with the roadway, the water districts. So if you guys could do something to cut back regulation, I find this with running my business. We have so much regulation from the state of New York as far as HUD, as far as if the FMMACS, we have regulations that I have to do in the business every single quarter. And I mean, it's something that I do myself, but most companies have to pay an employee to specifically keep in touch with all of the regulations that the state of New York has set forth on business. So if you can cut back the regulations, let the highway department do the work without having to call in 10 engineers, an environmental wizard, you know, things get out of control. When Hurricane Irene came forth up into Vermont, right where my house was on the brook, the water came right up to the house. There was severe damage, roads were wiped out, everything was gone. The state of Vermont, they cut out every single regulation for 2 months. And they let engineers come in, they let contractors come in, they let them bring backhoes up the river that would have normally taken 4 months to get a permit. And, you know, I think that if we have a severe storm damage, I think then we need regulation cut back. Release restrictions until the the damages are taken care of. Just some of my thoughts. I'm sorry I come up, I couldn't resist.
Thanks, Jack. We've heard some comments like that in other meetings about the rising cost of, for someone wants to go for a grant funded project, whether it's a federal grant or state grant, they'll say, hey, I had to spend an extra $100,000 or tens of thousands of dollars more than I would have if I didn't do the grant. And that's obviously not what we want, right? We want to make sure we're doing this responsibly. And then, of course, like Jack just said, you have some of these people who are applying for these grants, having to go through hoops to get to it. So why have to go through all these extra hoops? And then, and in the end, spending more money too. So thank you for your comments. Any other? Yes.
You know, Kevin, I'm just hearing Jack, and it just reminds me. You know what? As a local representative, I think there's a huge difference in people that are businessmen and people that aren't. There's an understanding that some of these people that have, you know, look, I've met people in public office that have never really even held a job other than public office, let alone been responsible for a couple of dozen employees, turning a key, paying the rent, and making sure that everything gets taken care of. And it almost seems like, hey, you know what? If we make that money really unattainable, no one's going to go for it. When do we get guys like you to bring it up to Albany and say, can we start working with our taxpayers instead of working against our taxpayers? And that's really what the long and short of the regulations and getting crushed by relate to. And I just think there's a lack of understanding. You know what? If the governor was running a business and knew how to do it, I do not think that he would want to spend an extra 30% on all the crap. Plain and simple. And you know, some regulations are needed, but you know, talking about the bridge inspectors, when you have more inspectors than builders, there's a problem.
That's one of the regulations we've heard a lot about. So many inspectors at a bridge site that they said it comes partly from the federal, but the state has it in their manuals. That's why they have to follow the guidelines. Are there other thing I'd ask you guys as a group or whatever? I know you mentioned regulations, but if you have other specific regulations that you can point out to share with us, so we can bring those forward too, to kind of look to identify or make the case for those, because we often hear a lot about regulations, but we help to have a little bit more specific. I know the inspectors is one of those things we've heard. Like one of the things we've heard too is like, I think you mentioned when there's a storm or something like that, the easy regulations, you know. And I remember our soil water conservation districts do a lot of good work in our communities, but a lot of times their hands are tied, people's hands are, your guys' hands are tied to go into a creek or to do stream bank stabilization, because whether it's DEC or whether it's Army Corps of Engineers, you run into that type of challenge as well in some of your areas when you're dealing with challenges as well.
A lot, like our locality is looking to put in a new tree law, which we just changed to strengthen the law but make it less restrictive on the homeowners. But we have people that literally would like the highway department to go out and get permits to clear trees after a storm, after big storms. I think our highway department over the winter storms cleared somewhere in the area of like 800 trees. You want to go permitting 800 trees? Come on. It really, you know, it really gets to a point. And you know what? As the public, we're responsible for some of it as well. Everyone has their own agenda. And I just, you know, unfortunately, I just think that unless everyone can get together on the legislative side and say, look, the importance is functionality, the importance is making sure that safety is there, that we take care of this stuff, that we do it in the best, most economic way possible, so we can perpetuate the tax dollars instead of, you know, just raising the budget. Let's do something with this money. You know, until we can come to that consensus, and, you know, people understand where your votes go for. And I don't know when we get that for it. Sorry.
Thanks.
Jack,
I know, Jack does that, he's a good guy. Mary, did you want to say something?
Yeah,
Councilman?
I just wanted to, this is kind of like a wish list type of a thing. Not just being a councilwoman, but I'm also the supervisor of the transportation department for Brewster Schools, and I do all of the routing. So, I don't know, and I'm sure everyone's experiencing the same thing. When you're driving down the road, the person coming at you is on the phone and they're in your lane. And I have been actually in a few, I think it was in Connecticut, where I experienced that the double yellow in the middle of the road actually has brakes in it so that if you go over the line, your car vibrates. Yeah, so is that something that moving forward as we repave and reline or restripe these roads that will get put in? You know, and I ask this as a parent and a grandparent and myself, I find myself hugging the right side of the road all the time and watching the person coming at me because I'm afraid that they're going to hit me head on. And I've actually experienced a few close calls on Farm to Market Road, on Route 22, you know, 164, and also I wanted to bring up the coming out of Stage Birch Hill. So Brewster Schools goes all the way to the top. That's actually Brewster School District. And coming out of there onto 22, I actually have to give my driver 40 minutes to go to get there and back into town because we sit and wait coming out of there either way, heading north or south on 22 is you're taking your life in your hands, and we're doing it for school buses. So, and also I have another hot spot. 164, the one-lane bridges, I know we brought it up on one of our agendas, getting either stop signs in there, opening them up, I get a lot of parent concern about if I'm trying to travel, because now we're trying to avoid the traffic on 312 and 6, so we're taking the back way to get over to Carmel, because we service schools in that area, and parents are concerned they don't want the children, even though Carmel buses do it every day, the Brewster parents don't want us going through those bridges, because I know myself, I use them a lot, and if you knock them around here, they don't know to stop. So, some of my wish lists.
Well, I'm familiar with those bridges, right by the Lawler building, right?
Yes.
Somewhere? Yeah. I still get skittish going down there. I beat my horn and slow down just to make sure someone the other side knows I'm coming.
That triangle there, I mean, if it's necessary to be there, I've even thought, maybe a job on highway department, take the whole triangle out and bring the traffic a little more to the right so you can see the traffic coming down off 311. You know, that's another bad area.
Be careful what you wish for.
I serve on the Federal Traffic Safety Board, and we have the state DOT on the board as well. And these issues we've actually looked at. As far as the one-way bridges, you know, I've actually gone out there with the state DOT and county highway, and what they do is they look at the statistics of crashes, and that's how they base whether or not it's dangerous or they want to make any improvements. So they say, oh, there was no crashes, or only one person died in the last 10 years, so, you know, it's not worth allocating the money and resources for that, actually both those locations. They are working with us to figure out some solutions for Birch Hill coming down. But as far as the one-way bridges, we've looked at them, and they've looked at them and said, yeah, they don't even think a stop sign would be necessary, because they said that adding a stop sign, people aren't used to it, and it would cause more problems. So those are the answers we got.
You know, there is a lot of traffic and a lot more people using them than so we experience. But definitely.
Rumble.
We have to have that.
I know the
Everybody has to
county's working on that, or trying out some of the roadways that, I think Crooked Falls Road, you're looking at, bringing them in the center line.
Just out of curiosity,
To market, they need them on 22, it's bad.
is it to do those rumble strips? Is it costly? How much does it cost to do something like the rumble strips? Does it add a lot to a project like that you're working on, or is it just?
I don't know.
I'm just curious. Just out of curiosity, I wouldn't think, but I don't know.
it's definitely something we can always look more into, because
Well, 'cause you have the public safety side of it. I mean, obviously, you see, where you're driving down the road, it says, pull over, there's a text area there, but if you got something in there, I've seen the same thing where people are just coming over the road, they're obviously doing something differently, but if it wakes them up, or whether they're fall asleep, or whether they're on their phone, or eating a hamburger, I mean, do something.
In a lot of these roads, there aren't, and there's no way. I think about being on 312, where are you going to pull over? Because,
Take a trip in the Pleasant Valley.
Listen, my bus is going there.
Same.
So I know. I was shaking my head with you.
And the Pudding Street interchange, I know Senator Serino is very instrumental in getting funding for that. I believe that's starting in its process really next year, which is talk about safety for our school children on school buses and just anybody. I grew up in Putnam Valley, and Sam knows this. I used to ride my bicycle down Peascott Hollow Road, up Wikipedia, and then I don't know how my parents let me do this, but I actually rode my bicycle across the Chicago State Parkway to Roaring Brook, where my brother and sister lifeguarded. But 20 years ago, I don't know, was the traffic the same? It's just different. But it's a scary spot. So that's a good investment of tax dollars in the Pudding Street interchange. But I want to thank, is there anybody else that wanted to say any words? I know we had the gentleman from Sullivan County. Anybody else wants to say anything? No? With that, I want to just thank everyone for being here. Thank you for your comments, and really appreciate it. I think Phil and I, we've got one more. This was supposed to be the last one, and then there was that, the one before this was supposed to be our Capital Region up in Albany, but they had that tragic accident with a limousine, so we rescheduled it for, I think, next week. So that will be our final one, but I want to just thank you all for your feedback.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and safe travels home.